أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to you all. Welcome back. It seems like quite a while since our last webinar. It was only 7 days ago, but for some reason it seems like quite a while ago. But hey, it's probably because I'm missing you all. MashaAllah. We've got quite a number of you in the room so far. We've got 83 of you, alhamdulillah, already, and I'm sure that will go beyond 100 a little bit later on, inshallah. Good. Okay. Right. So thank you very much for joining us, wherever you may be. And I always say the same thing, whether it's over here, it's the afternoon. Okay. So whether it's the evening or the morning, I know if you're in Australia somewhere, it's going to be probably early hours of the morning, I think it is. Okay. So wherever you are, inshallah, welcome to you. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Abdullah Sahin with us here this afternoon, and he's going to help us to answer a very important question. We always have very important questions here in these webinars. And this week's very important question is, how do we embed tarbiyah in our teaching practice? How do we embed tarbiyah in our teaching practice? Okay, we might think, oh, that's really easy. I do it every day. If you do, then alhamdulillah, fine. But I'm going to ask you what tarbiyah is a little bit later on in a moment, okay? Because we want to find out what your definition of tarbiyah is. And if you've never heard of that word before, then even more reason for us to ask ourselves that question. Because in a way, it's a prerequisite for this session, for you to understand what the word tarbiyah means, and then figure out how we can embed tarbiyah in our teaching practice. Before we do that, let me introduce our dear guest speaker here, Dr. Abdullah Sahin, who comes from Islamic studies, theology, educational studies, and social sciences background. He conducted research on religious identity formation among British Muslim youth and worked on educational strategies to address the impact of religious extremism within Muslim minorities and majority contexts. Dr. Sahin has developed the first recognized master's level degree program on Islamic education within the UK higher education system. He has taught at the universities of Birmingham, Aberdeen, and the Gulf University for Science and Technology in Kuwait. Before taking up his appointment at Warwick University, Dr. Sahin worked as head of research and a senior lecturer at the Markfield Institute of Higher Education. He served as a visiting professor at a well-known institute in Paris in 2009 and 10. I'm not going to try and pronounce the name of that institute because I was lost after the first word, and there's a whole sentence of letters and apostrophes and all sorts. So Dr. Abdullah Sahin will probably, if he can, mention the name of that very famous institute in Paris, the one of which I can't pronounce. Dr. Sahin is a member of the International Seminar of Religious Education and Values and was recently appointed as a visiting professor the UIN State Islamic University in Jakarta, which is in Indonesia. Dr. Sahin is currently reader in Islamic education at Warwick University. And Dr. Sahin has produced numerous scholarly publications on Islam and education. His most recently published book is entitled New Directions in Islamic Education, Pedagogy and Identity Formation. I've got the book here, and mashallah, it is signed. And for the purposes of this afternoon's webinar, if you've got this book, then you've got to be turning to chapter 7, which is the theme of today's, this afternoon's webinar. But I've got my book, mashallah, and if you want to try and get your hands on a copy of this book, perhaps we can explain how to do that a bit later on after the webinar, inshallah. Okay. And Dr. Sahin is also working on two further book projects, which are about critical issues on Islamic education and Islamic education international perspectives. And inshallah, I hope to get my copy of those two books as well. But as I said to Dr. Sahin, even though I think it was about 5 years ago, Nida, we helped with the launch of this book, I need to read it again because that chapter 7, if I said to Dr. Sahin, don't ask me any questions about chapter 7 because I won't be able to answer them. So after this session, inshallah, I've got to read. I should have read it before actually, but after this session, inshallah, I will read chapter 7 again. Just to really, these sorts of books you've got to read again and again. Reading a book once is not good enough. You've got to read them again and again to get all sorts of different meanings from it. And hopefully, after hearing from the author of the book, when we read the chapter again, inshallah, we'll get all sorts of new meanings, hopefully, inshallah. Just to explain, for those of you who are not used, who've joining us for the first time, okay, just explain how it works. This is obviously a webinar. It's not a workshop as such. However, there will be a presentation by Dr. Abdullah Sahin for about half an hour. We will then allow for Q&A. And the way that the Q&A works, if we would prefer verbal questions, so you just simply put your hand up. There's a reaction button that you press and you raise your hand, or you just write the word speak in the chat box, S-P-E-A-K, speak, and then I will just put you in order, and then inshallah you will be able to ask your question to Dr. Abdullah Sahin. We are going to try and end on time. Normally we don't end our sessions later than 5:05. So if you've got something else happening just after 5:05, don't worry. Inshallah we will end by then, inshallah. So first of all, I'd like to welcome our wonderful speaker. Let me unmute you first of all, just to welcome you. There you go, there you go. Dr. Abdullah Sahin, how are you doing? Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam, alhamdulillah. You're okay?
All right, good, great, okay. Now what we're going to do is, I know that the chat box at the moment is currently disabled. So, I mean, well, all the messages come to me. What I'm going to do, I'm going to allow for you to type a message and everyone can see it. And the question is this: what is your understanding of tarbiyah? I'm not talking to Abdullah Sahin, I'm talking to the virtual audience of 113 people here, or 111, except if you minus yourself and me and you and Doctor, then we've got 111 people, 112 people. What is your understanding of tarbiyah? Just write it in the box, please. We're learning together, remember. No, you just write it in the box, please. It's not, you don't need to say it verbally. We just want to get a bit of an idea. Remember, as teachers, you always want to know what the children already know, okay? And in this case, we want to know, what do the adults already know, right? Something, growth, development, Islamic habits, nurturing, upbringing of people, holistic Islamic education, embedded character education there, nurturing, noble characteristics, nurture. The word nurture is coming up a lot. From root to shoot, I like that one. Spirituality, Sunnah and Quran. All right, another 10 seconds. Embedding Islamic values, nurturing the internal and external aspects. So this idea of holistic is coming about. Tarbiyah comes from the word Rabb. Okay. Inculcating purpose of creation, nurture again, human development. Yeah.
Very good. Yes.
Mentoring. All right, brilliant. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to pause you there. Brilliant. Thank you. Character development was the last one. Okay, right. So if we can start first of all, Doctor, before you deliver your presentation, just so that everyone understands what the word tarbiyah is, because what we don't want to do, I'm pretty sure you would have gone through it anyway during the presentation, but just to be absolutely sure that all 113 people in the room are clear what the word tarbiyah is, so that we can then better appreciate this, your presentation about embedding tarbiyah into teaching practice. So what is tarbiyah?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah ala din al-Islam wa tawfiq al-Iman wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you, Baba. This is a very good introduction. And for all of you turning up for this session, I think what we have heard already tells us that our participants are familiar with this concept. It is, I will explain in a minute in much more detail, but it is an Arabic verbal noun. So Arabic is an interesting Semitic language. It's etymology, isn't it? So it goes back to a verbal action. So the word Rabb, as you mentioned, it's very much related to this concept, but the concept itself comes from three distinctive etymological origins, which all indicate growth, nurture, looking after, but also reform, guidance, hence leadership. So obviously nurture, what we have heard, character development are very good. But also tarbiyah is linked with islah in Arabic and guidance. So it has a leadership. So in other words, murabbi, the one who facilitates the act of education, tarbiyah, a teacher, is supposed to be facilitating not only nurture, care, but also showing quality of leadership and guidance and coaching. But we will come back to this. This is briefly definition of tarbiyah. And if I just finish off with one of my favorite classical scholars' definition of tarbiyah, which is a great 10th, 11th century scholar called Raghib al-Isfahani. Those who have worked with me, they will remember I'm very passionate about the classical scholars who written really, they were kind of pedagogues. They were educationally quite aware, really. So they produced these study aids to understand Islam and the Quran. So one of the things that they did was to produce these Quran study aids, lectionaries or dictionaries. So Raghib al-Isfahani has got famous Mufradat al-Quran, which basically means terminology of the Quran, in a very simple language to explain what the Quran is about. So his entry on Rab, it says, Rab fil asli at-tarbiyah. He says, actually Rab means tarbiyah, education. And then he says, what is tarbiyah? Insha'u shay'i halan fa halan, to facilitate growth of something through certain processes, ila haddi tamam, until that organism fulfills its potentials. So therefore, automatically, you can see why I have been very keen on this concept. And although I was studying Sharia in my classical sort of formative years, I never really came across that definition until I sort of stumbled upon Isfahani's definition, which is a very pre-modern text. But this definition of tarbiyah is a really modern concept. It is learner-led, nurture, care, guidance, and leading. So essentially, it kind of gives us a dynamic vision of what education is in Islam, really, and why we should embed this in our practice, not only as teachers, but also parents, as Muslims. So I think this is clear, I'll go back to my presentation.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much, Doctor. That lovely definition.
I hope you can see the PowerPoint. Is it visible?
Yeah. If you share your PowerPoint, yeah. You haven't shared it yet.
Right. Okay. Let me just do that.
Yeah. Okay. And so to the audience members who are just joining us, 117 of you, after Dr. Abdullah Sahin's presentation, inshallah, we'll take some questions, inshallah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Are we clear now? Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. So 20 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about how do we embed this tarbiyah in our teaching practice. So first, we have to reflect, we have to contextualize really our short reflection. So we have to look at what is happening to the education space in our communities. So in order to really, justify why we have to rethink what tarbiyah is and why we should embed, we have to contextualize this. So a little bit of critical reflection on why we are focusing on this concept and why we should embed, which takes us to really think carefully, what is education doing in our communities or not doing? And then that will take us to the word tarbiyah, as we've just explained. Why is it that tarbiyah is so significant as an inclusive educational pedagogic concept? So I am keen to reclaim this concept and hopefully clarify what it means. Ultimately, my definition of tarbiyah really will become very clear. It's a very inclusive process of facilitating human flourishing. This is a very important concept. It's a kind of a metaphor that comes from plant life, vegetation. And indeed, the origins of the word tarbiyah in Arabic are full of such plant-related metaphors to explain what education is or what it should be. And indeed, the prophetic perception of education, tarbiyah, is very similar indeed. There are many ahadith, prophetic reports, where we can see easily how Muhammad ﷺ's prophetic teaching was a form of facilitating tarbiyah, really, in many ways. So it is a metaphor full of plant-related activity, therefore human flourishing. But then I will take one step further. I will say actually unfolding flourishing is good, but also tarbiyah has got this transformative power. So in order to activity to become a tarbiyah framed, it needs to be really transformative. So in many ways, if you could embed this within diverse Muslim formal and informal education settings, like maktabs, madrasas, obviously formal Islamic schools, and wider community, I think there will be plenty of positive really change. And I believe that education will turn into a capital within Muslim communities. And then we'll have hopefully some question and answers. Okay, so the education space. How does education function in our communities? Obviously, everybody will have a different opinion. There are many good models, maybe not good models. But what it appears education is doing in the community context is usually functioning as a force for cultural, preservation, or keeping something, preserving something. So in a sense, education seems to be utilized as a safe space where something is being preserved, which obviously every good education will have such conserving act. But if education is only conserving and preserving, it will never become transformative. So it will end up being a form of transmission-oriented, instruction-oriented activity, where the learner, who is supposed to be getting a lot of benefit, will never get the benefit. So I will share why I think like this, because obviously we have to have evidence for this. Everybody will have a different experience. I will only share a bit of my experience where I was fortunate to actually develop an evidence-based understanding of how education is functioning in particularly Muslim minority contexts, like in Britain, and indeed majority contexts, where I did some empirical research, where I had some evidence suggesting that education in general and Islamic education in particular is really not delivering what it's supposed to be delivering. So the point is, how do we define the educational good? So in other words, every act must have an ethos, an aim. So when we deliver Islamic education, what kind of goodness we are serving? Is this the goodness that the parents, the schools want, or is it the goodness that children need, right? So we need to raise kind of the reflection a little bit high level. It's an important activity, but what kind of good we produce in the end? We must be open about this. In other words, whose interest is being served? Is it the learner, or is it the protecting parent, or society, or some guardians? So that will bring us to the concept of a link between education and identity formation, or character formation. So obviously education is really powerful when it actually embeds some sort of character development that you can actually see, just like a plant growing, fulfilling its potential. And then that will take us to a little bit problematize what are the aims of Islamic education, but then to what extent these aims, we can find reasons, evidence within Islamic tradition. After all, we are doing this Islamic education activity in the name of Islam. We've got to have an Islamic rationale. We can't simply say, well, it's Islamic, just go with it. We've got to really justify what is this ethos. And then I will hopefully end up with saying that why I have actually, while going through this experiment research, I ended up actually finding myself kind of dedicating my professional career into Islamic education. And I was lucky to work with Islamic context as well as currently in a university context, where my aim is to make Islamic education an inclusive subject, having a dialogue with education sciences, but becoming an interdisciplinary field for critical study, empirical research, and hopefully professional practice. Right. Now, let's come my evidence. The book that Brother Baba just shared, it goes back, it is original sort of impetus goes back to a research I did almost 10 years ago in Birmingham, where the idea was a city like Birmingham, where we have multicultural society, we have minority faith communities coming from diverse cultural, linguistic backgrounds. The question was how particularly young generations of Muslims receive instruction in Islam, learn about Islam, and develop an Islamic identity. So I was really curious to find out whatever was happening in the madrasa, maktab, mosque, and within the school, Islamic schools. I was curious to find out the kind of impact, the end result on the learner. Because if I was going to ask these stakeholders, everybody would say, we are doing a fantastic job, in our madrasa or maktab or mosque. But we need to have an objective criteria to say, okay, your activities you are doing are actually producing tangible results. So for me, the key thing was education is, if it's going to be really powerful, it should have an impact on the formation of attitudes, the character, and identity of young Muslims, the learners. So it's a very long story. Obviously, you have to have a research tool. This is to do with psychology, social psychology. Briefly, we've kind of developed a model called Muslim Subjectivity Interview Schedule. It's basically a research framework. You can apply for 1 hour or 45 minutes. It has instruments will help you to understand the participants, basically formation of their religious identities. And this model works on a continuum of commitment, which indicates presence of identity, or diffusion, which means there is no identity, or exploration, which means the person is in a search process. So this model obviously was framed to look at particularly participants talking about their learning of Islam in various settings and how they actually, that has shaped their Islamic perception and identity. So we focused on 16 plus group, sixth form colleges at that time. And we had roughly around 500 participants. Obviously, they were coming from different sub-communities, all kinds of networks. So it's a long story. The short sort of outcome was that majority of young people reported to have some sort of a four-clause identity. That means they were very committed to be Muslim, but when you ask, what does it mean to you as a Muslim, explain to us, they lacked Islamic knowledge, they couldn't explain why. So psychosocially, they were telling us, they were simply really following what it was given to them, and it was becoming, in a sense, difficult for them to really justify because they had no knowledge. There were some small group who were not interested, the fused group, and there were some people who were in kind of continuous exploration. So the achieved status, which really meant young people to an interactive process of learning, actually understanding the basics of knowledge, knowing the boundaries of what they know, what they don't know, and kind of engaging in developing a mature Islamic identity, was the least encountered category, unfortunately. So that indicated, of course, among many things, that Islamic education in formal and informal sense doesn't seem to be producing exploratory mindsets or religiosities. So in many ways, the question was, if this is the case empirically, what is going on? Maybe in Islam, we have only a model of education that produces four-clause minds, because Islam is a religion and you have to follow, full stop. So some people argued that this is what it is. This is the zone of proximal development of Islamic sense of education. So in many ways, it appeared within the Muslim minority context of UK, Islamic education was functioning as an acculturation, retention of culture, the tools to preserve something. But young people's experiences was quite different because they were retaining a link with Islam, but it didn't really appear to be the fact that they were actually having a knowledge of Islam or developing Islamic understanding. Obviously, this is not to generalize, but it was overall telling us a story that Islamic education is overwhelmingly producing not really human flourishing, but some sort of four-clause mindsets, which I thought we really need to kind of look at it again. So the question was, what is education then? but in general, but in Islamic sense. So you could say education, of course, to do with the knowing facts, understanding, conceptual awareness, but also education is supposed to be connecting. It must have a spiritual, moral, emotional competence development. And then, of course, it got to have some sort of skill sets to do things. Education is an applied field. But what we found in our experiment, that education was functioning at what they call, the cognitive psychologist, low-level thinking skills level. Those of you who are educated, they would know this, a famous American psychologist, cognitive psychologist, Benjamin Bloom. He came up with this cognitive trajectory of cognitive development. And he identified low-level thinking and high-level thinking. So the low-level thinking is all to do with retaining knowledge, information, understanding, but less advocating, analysis, reflection, critical thinking. So Islamic education appears to be functioning at a low thinking level, sadly. And it's nothing to do with, obviously, education in Islam, but that was the cultural manifestation. So the educational culture seems to be, so now we are moving from education as an activity, but a concept of educational culture. This is, the way in which we communicate values, learn how to be a member of a community. It appears to be that culture, the educational culture, really functioning in a different way. By the way, it is nothing to do with only being a minority. We did the same experiment in Kuwait after 4 or 5 years. We found almost similar results, particularly Islamic education appear to be producing different types of foreclosed mindsets. And it's a concern because it means it is not deepening faith. Faith is not really deepening human personality. Anyway, so there are different angle to that. It's not only the Muslim minority context. There's a problem within the Muslim majority context as well. So that has really made me to closely examine what is education in Islam, what is ethos of education. And this is where I come across the concept of tarbiyah, of course. And I realized that actually, education is all, in the broader sense, is to become a human being. It's very inclusive. But in the specialist sense, it means facilitate teaching and learning. I realize in both senses, Islamic education is really not doing justice to the learners. Teaching and learning seems to be very simplistic, geared into passing on, transmitting certain knowledge, skills, and body of instruction, basically. Again, it's not a generalization, but we have to be careful. Overwhelmingly, it was like this. So the question was, and often Islamic education was confused with Islamic studies. You might think about this because the word education is broader than the word study. Study is only a cognitive reflection. You have the knowledge base, but education is what to do with that knowledge. If that knowledge is nourishing your soul and your mind, you are moving beyond simplistic scholarship, you are becoming actually embedding it with your life. So I claim Islamic education is a broader concept than Islamic studies. Islamic studies is simply one aspect, but unfortunately, in our formal and informal setting, it's reduced to Islamic studies. So we need to look at what is the core narrative of Islam of being human being. It's very deep. Sadly, we've got to be a little bit philosophical now. We have to really reclaim, as Muslim educators, what is the Quranic narrative of being human? And we have, of course, wonderful explanations. And then, what does it mean to be educated Islamically in the modern world? These are very complex questions. I'm not going to go into it, but we have to really see the wider picture. And then, Islamic education obviously has a pedagogic specialism. That means, how do we create an active environment of learning, teaching that leads into learners' observable development. And that means we got to have plan for Islamic literacy, knowledge, understanding of Muslim heritage is crucial, not Islamic studies bit, but we cannot stop there. How do we introduce Islam to young people who are obviously living in a very challenging context? And beyond that, how could we facilitate faith, identity, value, character development? And then how do we enable this to actually link the learner to the context they're living, community, society? And is there any space for intercultural civic competence development? So as you can see, the whole thing becomes really complicated. So you're into rethinking the entire philosophy of education in Islam in order to be able to embed this in our practice as educators. So tarbiyah, thank God, is a really God-sent concept. And I was so lucky that when I looked at this great Raghib al-Isfahani's book, that was for me inspiration. I saw that entry, Arab fil asli at-tarbiyah. Rab actually means education. It kind of turned my thinking other way around, basically. So the concept is embedded in rububiyyah. So those who studied theology, they would know in Islam we have tawheed, oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ultimate goal, but it has got rububiyyah aspect, ubudiyyah aspect. That means oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must reflect in the way the divine interacts with humanity, and then our recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as only God who is worthy of worship. So, but rububiyyah is the key. Not many people talk about this. Rububiyyah is really the educational quality of the deity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is introducing himself as educator, really. Someone who takes human condition seriously because it's created human condition, gifted life, but then it wants to help this human organism to fulfill their potential. So the interaction between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and humanity is that of care, looking after, guidance, and continuous development. It's a crucial point. So therefore, tarbiyah is a developmental dynamic concept. It has growth, change, nurture in it. It's a relational, ethical, and therapeutic concept because there is a care looking after the soul. So self, other, and nature, environment, is part of this relational concept of tarbiyah. It is leadership focused because tarbiyah must lead to something, guidance. So the educator, murabbi, must facilitate guidance. Learner-led, it empowers the learner. It is not there to simply exercise educator's authority and power. It's the other way around. Education is really learner-led in the rububiyyah tarbiyah model. It's gender inclusive. As you can see, the word is feminine actually. So it is facilitating growth, looking after. And it has personal social aspect because it has islah, that means reform, continuous reforming oneself, and iflah, that means prosperity. So one of the end game of tarbiyah is really achieve iflah, prosperity in life, or well-being, essentially. And of course, recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's oneness, but then the Quran complements tarbiyah with the concept of ta'aruf. That means, in many ways, those who you remember the verse in the Quran, it says we've created humanity from a single cell, isn't it? As man and woman, people of different cultures and different languages, so that there is a space, it says, lita'arafu, so that people could learn from one another. So it's beautiful. The difference in the Quran is perceived to be potentially positive, not negative. So therefore, it's a chance to learn from one another. So I call this tarbiyah/ta'aruf model of education that needs to be embedded in our practice. And that makes educator's task, could be a parent, could be a madrasa teacher, could be a school. That means we cannot simply stuck to transmission of instruction. We have to really have a holistic, transformative take on human flourishing. That is a crucial piece of information we have to bear in mind. And I'm not going to go into detail. You may look at this later on. So there's actually a full model of tarbiyah linking to human nature in the Quran. And it is individual and social unfolding, what we should achieve. And there are lots of goals, attainment goals, learning outcomes to be achieved. You can see from the concept of fitra, nafs, tadabbur, tafakkur, we have a complete picture. So the Quran in the 7th century context, isn't it? People were not even literate in the sense of today. The Quran uses tadabbur and tafakkur, that means reflection and thinking, as it is entry to achieve its own educational learning outcomes, i.e. to bring about a new humanity. So it's amazing to see the Quran has actually a fully fledged pedagogy that facilitates growth into humanity. It's not a theoretical, it's an applied practice. And with the ta'aruf, it comes with all kinds of other values that we talk about. And in the end, education becomes, tarbiyah becomes, a learner-led transformative process of human flourishing in order to be able to bring about a dignified, just living. Right. Now, one more piece of information. as I said, the tarbiyah is linked terribly with the vegetation and the lushness, with the grass, basically. So I humbly called, when I realized this etymological connection, I humbly called my theory, my philosophy of tarbiyah, as cloud and grass theory of education. And there's a reason for this, because the word tarbiyah in Arabic is linked with rabab, which means clouds, literally. If you look at the classical dictionaries, you will find. And the clouds, apparently, they've got an educational function because they contain water, rain. And when the rain hits the soil, it facilitates growth of vegetation. So to the Arab mind, clouds are associated with facilitating education. So I thought that's brilliant. So in other words, murabbis, they got to be like clouds, having water, isn't it? And they grace this with the learners, they share this, they facilitate, just like the cloud bringing down the water. And you will be amazed to see this analogy in Prophet Muhammad's hadith. Those who study with me, they would know, we go through some of these hadiths in detail. The analogy is always this metaphor of rain, cloud, and vegetation in order to find out different types of learners. So you may look at this in detail if you have some time to look at the book. Our metaphor is really the teacher must be like a cloud who facilitates, basically. But he doesn't simply dump knowledge, information, simply insist on memorization and taking in, but somebody who actually there to facilitate growth of somebody else through a caring process, guidance and coaching. Yeah. So that's a very crucial point. Murabbis are just like clouds. Remember that metaphor. So there is no space in Islamic education for indoctrination, for simple instruction, if you see what I mean. If you truly follow the meaning of the concept. Now, let's come back. I don't know how much time I have got, Babar. Another 10 minutes probably. I will just summarize. How do we embed this notion of dynamic?
If you can do it in 5, that will give us more time.
In 5, yeah. It is obviously, we got to think the institutions first. We have obviously madrasas, maktab, Islamic schools. I would say there's a really need to reflect this at the policy level, at the ethos level of these educational institutions. So we got to have a change in educational culture in these institutions. And the management and the leadership must really bear this seriously if they are going to be qualifying their activities Islamically. If they're going to be an Islamic school, they must take this seriously, basically. Not because I say so, but because really this is what it appears to be in the Quranic narrative education. So we need to have huge effort in curriculum, teaching and learning resource development that reflects these principles. And obviously we've got to have prioritized teacher education. Sadly, we don't have in European context a specialist Islamic teacher college to actually train our teachers, sadly, still, although we are in the 5th generation now, and we have a growing, mashallah, Islamic schooling sector, but we don't have a specialist Muslim teacher training college, which is very sad because we cannot develop these resources unless we have this specialism. And inshallah, maybe one day we will have such an institution. But at the teaching level, the teachers are very crucial because, research tells us teachers, those who bear in mind students' social and emotional skill development, they always draw attention to the relation between teacher and the learner. So teachers have got a huge impact on learners' future success. And these are longitudinal studies, by the way. And teacher and student brain activity even are measured to be synchronized where education is productive. There are ways of measuring this stuff. So the teacher's role is crucial in all this. So we got to have embed this tarbiyah not only in our lives as Muslims, but I would say into the teacher education programs, which I'm very keen on. And that tarbiyah ta'aruf approach to teaching or teacher development would obviously look at knowledge of human development. And then we have to ensure that we understand how learning works. There's a whole, psychology behind this to design motivating, inspiring learning and teaching, where obviously we are fostering also higher order thinking and obviously greater social emotional development. Individual differences, according to this model, to be respected. And after all, education is a relational concept where we have an ethics that should govern our relationship with the learners. So education becomes, isn't it? It's not stuck into the study level, but into a broader guiding and coaching level. So the model moves away from the instruction-centeredness to the learner-centeredness. Okay, so I think, and we have some further reading, those of you who are interested. I'm hoping that we will pick up some of these points when we discuss, but there are three major, really short readings I suggested. One is chapter 7 in the book, but also there is a short chapter I have written about education in Islam to be a compassionate transformation. So really, again, it's tarbiyah summarized in a nice way as a compassionate transformative experience. And those of you who have some time, please do read them. They're all available online. So thank you very much for your attention. And I look forward to your questions, reflections, inshallah.
All right, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah Sahin. Let me remove your PowerPoint and then we could see you. There we go. Okay, right, okay. Right, so thank you so much for that presentation. A lot to think about, of course, and mashallah, we've got 141 participants in the room, and I'm sure their brain is frying like mine is right now. But anyway, I'm sure you've got lots of questions. So if you've got any questions, or you may want to contribute in terms of a comment, this might be something that you are studying at the moment, and so in which case you're welcome to share your thoughts as well, inshallah. So if you do have any questions, please put your hand up and I can come to you. If you'd prefer to write the word speak in the chat box, then I can come to you. I'll call out your name, inshallah. Okay, I'm just gonna have a quick check. I've got one person's hand up. Just want to check if there's anybody else. All right, one hand at the moment. We'll go to that person. Not quite sure. Is it okay? Right. Okay. Let's go to. I presume it might be an acronym. It might be the name Ahnaf, but I will go to you. I'm going to unmute you now. Assalamu alaikum. What is your question or comment? Let's unmute. I think if you press your unmute button as well, that would probably work. There you go. Let's try again. Let's lower their hand and press unmute. There we go. Ahnaf? No? Right, okay. Right, I think we've lost Ahnaf. I think, let me just double check. No, we haven't. We've still got them there. One last chance. Ahnaf. 3, 2, 1. Oh, unfortunately. Never mind. Let's go to the next person. Okay, we have Abu Hafs who wants to say something. Let's go to Abu Hafs. Unmute you. There you go. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Go ahead. What's your question or comment? Yes.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum. First of all, thank you for the talk. It's very beneficial. Just a quick question. You may know that when we were younger, we were always taught in madrasa that tarbiyah qabla ta'lim. That it's very important that the tarbiyah comes before any kind of education. I want to ask you, when you're raising our children or the school children that we work with, how important do you feel that it is to embed the tarbiyah first before we formally educate them? Or do you think that they go hand in hand?
Okay, let's unmute you first of all, Dr. Abdullah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Did you catch that question?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I think these are two concepts that are often confused. Obviously, ilm and ta'lim, you are right to do it, instructing, passing on knowledge is very important, much of Islam. But you are again right, tarbiyah is a much more comprehensive concept. It is kind of implicit, really, teaching and learning or curriculum. So it's with the values and cultural sort of orientation. So I would say, yes, I think we have to really make sure that these educational environments are really tarbiyah framed first, by between all kinds of activities, including teachers' activities. Role is to, the word is initiate, I suppose, is to encourage, initiate, inspire, rather than immediately jump on to pass on simply knowledge. So you are right, what's happening in our madrasa maktab space, maybe there are many reasons for this, because time is not sufficient, it's only 2 hours, weekends. So we end up providing children with an Islamic education that is really, it's like ta'lim, it's like instruction, because it doesn't go beyond memorization. And children, repetition, children sort of associate Islam with kind of repetitive actions and knowledge transmission. But we have to make sure that it's only part of the story. The real story is what children do with this knowledge, how that shape their values and attitudes. That's a difficult, that's a tarbiyah related question. So I would say that ilm and ta'aleem are important, but they are an element of tarbiyah education. So we need to really create that nurturing, inspiring, confidence building environment first, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, if I just add on one point,
yeah.
We have to think of developmental process as well. So obviously children, they come to madrasa 5, 6, and then go adolescent years. So clearly we have to have a developmental view of what we provide them with at the madrasa space. It's always going to be the same activities. Clearly it's not going to shape learners' identity or their character. So we've got to have individual differences or a developmental view of how we offer education that not only informs, but also actually helps them build their personalities.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much. Apologies for the slight audio interference there. I'm not sure whether it's Dr. Abdullah's side or whether it's my side or whether it's somebody else's side. Anyway, let's move on to the next person. We've got Sister Fatima who has a question. I'm going to unmute your mic as well. There you go. There you go. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Fatima. What's your question or comment?
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairan kathiran to the brother for such a lovely reminder. And really, I have to say, my mind was totally blown because I'm a new teacher. I've only started teaching from September. And I've always believed I was a bad teacher, but this, in a way, reinforced that I need to learn so much more, but also gave me hope that actually with the right intention and with the tools needed, one of them is probably your book, inshallah, I will get there. But my question, so that was the comment, the question is, how does a teacher almost single-handedly, because obviously we're part of a machine, and the impression that I got is it has to be a systematic, almost deep-rooted change of our whole concepts. So as a teacher within a school, how can I make a difference when I sometimes feel all odds are stacked against even this idea, being management, as you said, limited resources. When I mean limited, literally almost non-existing resources. Then there is things like exam pressure, parents' expectations of their children's achievement in terms of exams. What's your advice? Where to start from and how to approach this, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
Lovely. Thank you, sister. All right, over to Dr. Abdullah.
Great. Thank you for this good question and the wonderful comment. Yes, I think what you're describing is a real challenge, particularly those who are new to the teaching. The problem is our subject, Islamic education, is a bit of an unfortunate subject. I say this like a kind of a self-criticism now because I'm part of the whole scene. Now, my experience of even working with Muslim schools, let alone the madrasas, is not that of really great inspiration, because by definition, they're supposed to be teaching, facilitating Islam in this tarbiyyatic model. Often we end up having almost no Islamic proper education provision in this space because of all these logistic problems. So what you're describing is a really a big challenge, because it could put off young people who are just going into teaching. So we have to find to break this, and we have to really change the mindsets and attitudes toward Islamic education. Teacher education is crucial. We've got to offer professional development continuous, just like Nida is doing, Jazakumullah khair, with small resources. We've got to really offer this support for Muslim educators. Until we have proper teacher education resources, unfortunately, it's going to be a lonely act of your own dedication and trying to improve yourself and develop yourself. And of course, education is a very demanding subject, I know, profession. But I would say, at least from my experience now, at Warwick, we have at least 2 or 3 professional development courses where you have professional development learning community, Islamic education learning community. I would suggest you could get in touch with us. We might share some resources and you can contribute. So we really need to kind of put together our resources and our commitments to create this professional, professional approach to Islamic education. We have reached a point where young generations' needs really are growing and intergenerational change is big. Unless we make teachers genuinely supported, I really feel that we may not be able to reach out to young generations. So connect with the communities that are trying to really support Muslim educators. And also you're welcome to connect with us at our website. We have short and long-term training opportunities, at least support opportunities you can join, inshallah.
Shukran, thank you. Thank you so much. And I suppose if I can add something to that, which is that actually this is why the network has been formed, so we can share good practice. And what we're saying here, and certainly the message of Dr. Abdullah is, and also from our NIDA Trust point of view, is that we want everyone to be thinking about education from a transformational point of view. And that's something that we're going to be talking about a lot over the next few months and possibly years as well, until we really, that change does happen. There's been a lot of investment in institutions, in courses, etc., but very little when it comes to pedagogy and teaching practice. And this is something we as an organization are really going to be investing in for quite some time. And what Dr. Abdullah talked about is, and we would love to see an institution that is dedicated to Islamic teacher education, where we're talking about tarbiyah. And yes, sometimes you may not have, it may not be well resourced, you may not have everything that you need. But I always believe that where there's a will, there's a way there, and we need to be able to share what it is that we are doing and share good practice, inshallah, and start that conversation. So inshallah, I think it's not just a magic wand as such, and I think it will happen gradually. That's the nature of change. We shouldn't expect something to happen, but I think it's going to start initially by us changing our mindsets. Our mindset needs to change first, and this is what this webinar is about. I know that Dr. Abdullah is doing another few sessions with the supplementary school teachers. These are the alims and the alimas who are delivering those Islamic studies programs. We really want to change the mindset that it's not just about education, not just about protecting and really protecting a particular identity. We need to move away from that, and I think we're in an environment now where on a personal level, I go out for walks now every day. Okay, it's 7 o'clock. I take my 2 daughters with me, and the conversations I have with them, I'm honestly, I didn't have those conversations probably at 30. So the ideas, we're in the information age now, where children are not what they used to be. They're able to have very, very complex discussions about fundamental issues about life. And I think we as educators need to be able to navigate that and to really be very creative in the way that and dynamic in the way that we present our education. And it's not just about, here are a list of things that we want, here are a list of 10 things we want you to learn, just learn it. Education needs to be much more than that, I think. And it's not just us telling you, me telling you as a non-academic, or Dr. Abdullah telling you as an academic. The children will tell you themselves. They really will. And you know this already because you're already practitioners as well. So really, it's about mindset change first of all, inshallah. Then that will start. That'll be the first step towards the journey, inshallah. There are a few hands up now. Let's go to Sister Maliha, please, and I'm going to unmute you now, and then we'll go to Brother Sahin after that. Sister Maliha.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. What's your question?
Yeah. Yes, so the question is, actually, you mentioned a classical text. This is the way I understood. You mentioned a classical text about how you understood from there that the concept that the Rabb is equated with educator. And
Yes.
you mentioned the term, was it Isfahan? I just want to read. I forgot the name. What was it? What did you say?
Okay, Dr. Abdullah,
Yes.
what were those terms that you
Very
mentioned?
good, very good. This is Raghib al-Isfahani. So there are, of course, many Isfahanis in our classical tradition. This scholar is called Raghib al-Isfahani, and he's called Mufradat al-Quran, or Gharaib al-Quran. So it is one of the best, I would say, Quran study tools, basically. He initially produced because he was teaching in a Persian-speaking world. And of course, people didn't know Arabic, just like us today in the West, we don't know Arabic, of course. So you need to have someone to explain basics. You can't go through all the tafasir, the multi-volume commentaries, or translations, which are often wrong, sadly. So he decided to have this wonderful study aid, which he was really thinking pedagogically, educationally. So his entry, Al-Rab fil Asli al-Tarbiyah, is a really brilliant entry. And I think his definition of education is probably more advanced than Dovey or Paulo Ferreri's definition. Probably those who have read this text, you would know, at least my students. Indeed, in many ways, I would say this journey of mine has been rediscovery and reclaim the transformative take on what education is in Islamic heritage, which obviously produced a civilization. Anyway, so it is great. Raghib al-Isfahani, rahimahullah.
Shukran, thank you so much. Shukran, thank you so much, sister. All right, let's go to Brother Shahin, please. Shahin Rahman, I've unmuted your mic.
Assalamu alaikum, Doctor. Jazakallah khair for the wonderful presentation. I'm sure many others can relate to me when I say that you are actually taking us on a learner-led journey where inshallah we will fulfill our full potential as well. Bi'ithnillah. My question is that in light of the current global pandemic, the world is naturally going through a huge change when it comes to educational pedagogy. More and more universities, especially Cambridge University is one of the more prominent ones that have announced that next year they're going to switch everything to online. Now, in terms of tarbiyah within the Islamic tradition, has traditionally emphasized suhbah and company. And company has generally been understood as face-to-face company, real company. Now, or physical company rather, of course, there's many types of companies. Now that more and more people are receiving digital or online education as a more valid platform, or at least are becoming more and more open to it, how can we apply the tarbiyah model, which generally has, or at least traditionally has, customarily emphasizes physical company and face-to-face interaction and dialogue? How can we implement tarbiyah on the online digital platform?
Thank you, Sheikh Shahin. This is really a good question. And you are right. I mean, usually halaqa, sohbah, these are tend to be kind of defining features of tarbiyah or Islamic education, which is to do with human interaction. But you are right. The reality is we are living in a virtual space more and more. I suppose my answer would be probably a blended, version of tarbiyah. I don't think we could buy into this totally augmented virtual reality. But I'm in favor of creating resources that obviously fulfill the ethos of tarbiyah, albeit via creative means and learning resources. So in other words, the platforms could be quite creatively designed, and we need expertise, obviously, in ICT. But ultimately, a blended version, maybe you are right, is really the future. Never replace human one-to-one communication. But I think this space for adopting, I would say, a blended approach by producing tarbiyah resources that are catering for that. But ultimately, we have so many levels of information, passing on knowledge, foundational values. So it is the quality of these resources that really need to be developed. And I'm glad, of course, I know that you are quite interested in tarbiyah, and I'm sure you will make a creative contribution to that front.
Okay, shukran. Thank you so much. Let's go to, we are running out of time, so I'm just trying to get through. We've got more and more questions coming in. We've got Brother Muhammad Amiji. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for your time and for the opportunity. A quick question, if I may, Dr. Sahin, based on your methodology to the Muslim subjectivity interview schedule, which you kindly reference. You cited an example in the Muslim minority context here in the UK of some schools in Birmingham, and also majority context in Kuwait. And I'm just querying really the assumption or perceived assumptions that you made from your empirical research. Given the fact that, from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the schools in Birmingham, although being Muslim majority schools, didn't have sort of a defined Muslim ethos. And therefore, the link from that to the idea that what you appear to be suggesting is that there seems to be a greater focus on preservation, if you like, as opposed to transformation. Essentially, what I'm asking is how valid is that assumption to make?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. Obviously, you have to look at the entire empirical case studies that we've conducted. So the criteria we are using is a psychosocial criteria. That means the observable features of personality formation. Obviously, this is a complex question because personality could be shaped by all kinds of education activities, although I was focusing on formation of religious identity, therefore learning and teaching of Islam, i.e. Islamic education. So the links, of course, cannot be causal links 100%, but cannot be ruled out either, because we were asking the general person, we were asking questions about the religiosity. So the way in which their religious sort of faith was forming. So they were making references to questions, okay, where did you learn Islam? How did you learn? What do you remember? What is your experience of learning about Islam? So all of this, in a sense, evidence built up, and it gives us a picture that kind of Islamic learning was confined to instruction, basic memorization, and as they grew older, they became less and less aware of what they were actually learning. So clearly that gave us evidential base that they link that Islamic education in the kind of context is functioning towards forming different shades of focal mindsets. The word focal means taqlid. It would also mean being, in a sense, inward looking. It can have many meanings. But one thing was very clear: they were not really in charge of what they were learning, basically. Hence, it was not transformative, exploratory. Birmingham was a good experiment because you are right. I mean, there are differences from north, south. Birmingham, heavily invested in Islamic education. After all, we had the first Islamic government-maintained Islamic school, secondary school in Birmingham. It's a large area with huge Muslim population and great interest in Islamic education. Now, you have to look at, of course, the rest of the book where we have different data sets. This time, not only from children, my second experiment was not for higher education. I taught there for 10 years. I worked with Muslim teachers, graduates of Darul Ulooms who came from various Islamic seminaries. Invariably, when we applied the model, we realized even the Darul Uloom education system or seminary education seems to be showing much more instruction transmission-oriented model. So we have a different data set. This time with Muslim faith leaders who came from all kinds of Islamic seminary backgrounds. So in other words, Islamic education at the formative, at the kind of primary secondary level, but also higher education seem to be functioning within that instruction transmission and foreclosed mindset, basically. So you have to look at in detail, examine the data for yourself. But we have like 3 sets of data collected over 15 years, really. And it's all been reported in the book as case studies. So it's giving, and plus a Muslim majority context experiment. So in other words, Islamic education as a whole, from and informal, seems to be present operating. There are many reasons for it, of course. Within the transmission.
Dr. Abdullah Sahin, can I just say, your the audio is breaking up. I think it's probably because of the British weather. I don't know where you are. Which city are you in, Doctor?
I'm in my study. No.
No, which city are you in?
Oh, city.
Which city? Which city?
I'm in Northamptonshire. I'm in a
All
village
right,
called
okay.
Crick.
Is it overcast where you are? Is the weather very? We've got
The weather is
British
rainy.
weather.
Yes, is it
Yeah,
rainy?
so I
Yes.
think that's probably what has caused this interference with the audio. So let's stop there, because I think your audio seems to be getting worse with the deteriorating weather, I think. So rather than carrying on with the question, let's end it here. And also, remember at the beginning I said we'll end at 5:05. I do want to kind of stick to that. It's already 5:08 and we've still got over 100 people in the room. Thank you very much for carrying on. Just to mention a couple of things before we end, and I apologize for all of those who are waiting to ask questions. There are quite a lot of you, mashallah. I think the session has been hugely popular. So I really apologize to all of those who have written questions, those who have got their hands up, those who have messaged me to say, I would like to ask a question. I really do apologize, inshallah. We will bring Dr. Abdullah Sahin in again, inshallah, and you'll be able to pose those questions to him. Can I just ask you about the book, please? Because we don't want to go unless we've, I know we helped launch this book about 5 years ago now. Are these still available if the virtual audience would like to purchase them online?
Yes.
Is it available from Amazon or something like that?
It is available on Amazon, yes.
All right, okay. So I've mentioned the book name, which is New Directions in Islamic Education, Pedagogy and Identity Formation. If you Google it, you'll be able to get it from Amazon, inshallah. If you're abroad, I'm not sure.
Can I just say something about it?
Yes, you can.
Yes, there's also an e-format of this book,
Okay.
EPUB. Actually, it is a slightly revised edition. It was launched in the States, actually. So if you cannot get hold of the physical copy, check the EPUB or e-version, which look at 2014 extended edition.
Where can they get the e-version?
It's on Amazon. Yeah, it's Amazon. Yeah.
Oh, it's on Amazon. All right, okay.
Amazon,
So if they can't get the physical version, the e-version, which is actually cheaper as well, isn't it?
Slightly cheaper, yeah.
Fantastic. All right then. So good.
If you want to study the book, come and join us at Warwick at our PGA. We have a short course for just 10 weeks. We literally study content of this book. So you're welcome to join us.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much. Just one thing to mention to our audience members. Whilst I'm sure that the vast majority of you are teachers, whether in full-time schools, whether in supplementary schools, madaris, etc. If you are interested in becoming a qualified teacher, if you're not already, or you know anybody else who is interested in teaching, perhaps somebody who's coming to the end of their degree, somebody who's a postgraduate and would like to consider teaching. One of the programs that we have here at Nida Trust, and we've been running for more than 10 years, is the You Teach program. And so this weekend on Sunday, we're going to be running a session trying to convince audience members to consider teaching as an excellent profession, a very rewarding profession, but also that we will support them right the way through their teachers training program and beyond, even through their NQT year as well. So we have Brother Marwan, who is the senior lecturer at East London University. He's one of the PGC tutors there. So he'll be talking about some of the routes into teaching. And I'll give a very short presentation about why I think you should become a teacher, or they should become a teacher, inshallah. Okay, so please join us. It's on Sunday at the time. Is the time mentioned here? It is, yeah, 3 o'clock. Sunday, 3 o'clock, inshallah. And you can register by going to our website, Nida Trust, nidatrust.org.uk, and there's a registration link there, inshallah. Okay, thank you once again, everyone. Please join us again next week, where we will have our 8th speaker in this series, inshallah. We have Dr. Farah Ahmed, who will be talking about understanding education in light of Hadith Jibra'il. Understanding education in light of Hadith Jibra'il by Dr. Farah Ahmed. And that's next week at the same time, Thursday, 4 p.m. British summertime in the UK, inshallah. Some of you are asking, is a recording going to be made of this webinar? Of course it is, inshallah. So you will be able to watch this all again in a few days' time, and we'll send that recording out, inshallah. Okay, Jazakumullah khair. Thank you again, Doctor. wonderful having you. All right.
Thank you very much.
we'll
وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. Please pray for all of us. Thank you for tuning in and carry on, inshallah, engaging with this wonderful set of questions and issues that Nida is wonderfully putting together for all of us. So thank you.
And with that, I say salam to you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.